So we had opened up this thought process or conversation around does size matter? I'll try and get that one in again. Big packages in mega projects, is fewer big packages better than lots of small ones? Carlos, you like a small number of big packages or a big number of small packages?
Both seem threatening. So
you say both seem friendly.
Threatening.
Oh yeah. Welcome back to the Offsite Podcast. I'm Jason Lancini, joined as always, back in the driver's seat by Carlos Cavallo. Welcome back, mate. Today we are going to dive into three fascinating in-person, in London topics. We're going to start with, if you're in London, you're not going to talk about anything else, HS2. The super ambitious high-speed rail project recently came under new leadership. Mark Wilde, who previously led the successful turnaround of Crossrail, has stepped in with a bold reset plan that I think offers some valuable lessons for major project delivery. Then we'll examine a critical question in infrastructure delivery that we raised in a previous episode around big packages, small packages, does size matter in packages, the Paris Metro's evolution in how they deliver the most recent lines. Gives an interesting case study to dive into. Finally, we're going to look at Australia's first city in, I think, 100 and something years. I'll get the facts by the time we get to the main topic, but Bradfield City Center, and we'll see if this is a development rooted in substance or is it, I'm going to lead the witness here, marketing fluff. Carlos, welcome back, mate. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's weird being sat on the end of a very long table face to face. It's like a sort of Tudor banquet.
Yeah, to maybe set the scene for anyone listening, we're at kind of like a very, very, very long table, and we're sat at either end of the table. Now, some would say it's because of something to do with sound and podcasts, but I also feel like it's because we normally record this many hundreds of miles away. You want to get too close. You want to keep some separation.
Yeah. Boundaries.
It feels like, when you get like they'll have like a period drama and there's the like Lord and Lady of the Manor and they sit at complete opposite
10 seats empty in between.
Yeah, complete opposite ends of the banquet table. Yeah. That's, for those listening, that's what's basically going on right now. Well, we're in London together recording this in person for the first time in months. And as a double bit of good news, we might even sneak a bit of a beverage in after. So if this feels like better spirits than normal, that'll explain why.
That's the excitement.
Cool. Well, let's dive in straight off the top. I'll set the scene a little bit. The HS2 2 project is one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in British history. It's a 140-mile, that's effectively one glass city in the desert long high-speed railway designed to transform connectivity between London and the West Midlands. Originally conceived as this long Y-shaped network that goes all the way up to Manchester and beyond. The project itself has faced a bunch of, I'd say, almost crisis and some controversy. The most significant setback came in October 23 when the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak cancelled the northern legs to Manchester and Leeds. In December 2024, there was a change of leadership on the project amidst all of this controversy. A gentleman named Mark Wilde stepped into the role of CEO of HS2 with, I guess, a clear mission to break the cycle of cost increases and schedule delays that had plagued the project to date. And he recently released a March 25 update video where he offered a fairly candid assessment of the situation and outlined his strategy for getting the project back on track. Carlos, before we dive into the content of what Mark's update said, is there anything you would add on the background of the project and the scene setting so far?
Yeah, obviously, I can't remember a time when it wasn't constantly in the news, and it's just been this raft of constant negativity based on program and cost for the last 10 years now. Yeah, it feels like, obviously we'll talk about the switch itself, but it feels like a real like hands up moment of, look, we're not in a good spot. We're not hiding anything. Let's be honest about where we are. It feels like they're teeing up some really bad news, because if he's saying we need to stop it, that means he's going to kind of make a statement that the next number will be the number and the program will be the program, and we can actually deliver that. So I'd imagine it's going to be quite a significant jump, and then it will be maintained.
Yeah, to give, I guess, a final piece of context then. So for those that don't know Mark's background, this approach to resetting HS2 is probably heavily informed by his prior experience turning around Crossrail, which is now the active Elizabeth line, which faced similar scope of challenges before his and during his intervention. When he took over Crossrail in November 2018, it was 37 days from its scheduled opening date. Yet it had all bunch of critical system work remaining incomplete, a whole bunch of structural work incomplete, a bunch of stuff incomplete, and a budget that was basically unbelievable. So he is credited with turning around the Crossrail project. He implemented a transformational owning the whole philosophy, moving project beyond siloed collaboration to this kind of integrated system ownership. He also transitioned from this big bang opening idea to kind of staged opening and phase commissioning. In many of the locations of Crossrail, they took direct ownership of the tier 2 and 3 supply chain, and in some cases booted out tier 1 contractors, and then started implementing some shared incentive schemes with the delivery partners on the project. So that's his background. He is just gone over, I think, 100 days in the role at HS2. And as I said, his update was, and as you kind of alluded to, Carlos, pretty candid. These are the things that he said. After spending his first 3 months visiting teams across the route, he identified 3 fundamental issues undermining the project's performance. This is HS2. First, HS2 had suffered from immature design development, with construction proceeding before designs were sufficiently advanced. I've got some thoughts. Second, construction activities have been missequenced, with civil engineering works progressing before critical systems contracts like track and overhead line, etc., were finalized. This kind of disconnected civils and system integration worked in the schedule, which was something that happened at Crossrail. And then third, the governance framework had lacked the rigor necessary for a project of this scale, with insufficient accountability and transparency. So pretty cutting for Europe and the UK's biggest infrastructure project that's active at the moment. Is this him setting, capturing basically re-baseline the expectations to deliver on top of, or is there a lot of truth here?
Yeah, I think if we think about, we saw it at Crossrail, he's very much like a practical, let's be realistic, he seems like someone that will actually sit in the dirt with everyone and actually work their way through it. He's a bit of obviously a problem solver, and has been brought in because of the issues that they're having. I think it's a good thing they brought him in now, because technically we're quite early on in the construction phase. 40%
roughly complete, I think.
Rather than 30 days from opening.
37 days. It's definitely early. That is for sure. I don't know. Yeah, some people might consider the 40% somewhere near the middle, but yeah, it's definitely much earlier than 30 days from the scheduled opening date, for sure.
But I've always found there's kind of 2 types of, like in my experience, project directors. You've got the early sort of polished, sort of very good at customer facing, very much you're in that growth phase, everything's happy, you're growing the teams, you're doing work, it's all positive in the news. And then you've got your hard times project directors. Contractors go through similar cycles of, they bring them in, they're very, very strong on change, they're very sort of diligent and almost military in their delivery. So it feels like a natural arc that client organizations and contract organizations go through to ensure they're actually delivering what they should be delivering. So if we think about the public perception of Crossrail now, it's very positive. People don't remember it as this over budget thing that took years to open. It's the best tube line in London.
In fact, if you this is a topic for another time, but in the US, there's a lot of conversation at the moment happening in California around the high-speed rail project. And there, even in a recent book release there called Abundance, they're talking about Europe and the UK as having this history of successfully delivering mega projects compared to California.
Engineering-wise, it's a massive success story. Like it is. Yes, it was late and over budget, but everything is. And unfortunately, we're in this cycle of, if you want something approved, you've got to undercook it. We get the overruns and everything else that comes with it.
So are you making the kind of case that, I guess there's this conversation, or there's this paradigm that happens in companies where people will kind of classify people as like peacetime CEOs and wartime CEOs. Are you saying there's like a similar thing in kind of project directors?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's the corporate faces that are the good times at the beginning.
Yep.
And then you've got the in with the trenches, been there and done it, highly experienced problem solvers that are the sort of wartime that come in and actually get the jobs done.
There are definitely a couple of things in here that I just from looking at what Mark wrote and said that I kind of reflected on and thought about if, you know, I was in the same boat, what I would do and what I had seen previously in my time on construction projects. He definitely has a really compelling way of framing the story of what they're trying to achieve and creating this best for project type attitude. Because ultimately on projects, what you're trying to do is to take a whole range of people and companies that all have their own incentives and their own things that are driving some of their behavior and point them all in the same direction and incentivize them to the same outcome. And there's a really incredible way through both like storytelling and I guess through just open and transparency of driving this best for project approach, which is, I think a really big takeaway for me. And I think for anyone that's like in that spot of leading a major project, it's very tempting to go and fight your corner to, you know, capture every dollar and change, but you end up trading off this combative relationship that I think in the end hurts everyone.
And he also has because he's new, he can come in and paint the picture of how bad things are.
Yep.
Because he's new. You can't do that if you're 3 years into a job very easily. So I think there's going to be a significant.
He's going in there blaming everything on Biden.
And in the video, so there was a YouTube video that he announced, just for context. He did a bit of an update. This is the state of play, and this is what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
I think, some of his wording was quite interesting. He sort of, the way he described making sure the schedule's in the right order and things like that was they felt like subtle digs.
It's like, little digs like,
Wait, you're doing track before the pedal. You sure?
Yeah, making sure that there's no dummies, you know.
But then the other thing was he mentioned like return on investment within the community and everything that's being built around it. And it's all London focused. So he's going to get some heat off of that, I would guess.
Well, that's where the train line's being built, man. So like, it's not really his fault. If they had built the train further to the north, I'm sure he would have talked about.
Yeah, but there was no mention of Birmingham and things like that in terms of.
Is it going to Birmingham? Okay.
You just go to Old Common from Euston. So I think he's relatable. He's just a pretty honest speaker. He's been there and done it. You would expect him to grind out the delivery of, we're going to have a rough, probably a few months when real information emerges. I'm pretty sure you'll probably say I'm wrong, but by memory, was it the rest of the year to get the schedule right, he said in the video?
Possibly,
So it's not a quick turnaround. Yeah, really interesting to see how he manages that. But I would expect an honest end result.
One of the key things that he implemented at Crossrail and he's talked about on HS2, which I'd be interested in your take on, just to trigger some planners now, this idea of using windows, not dates. And I think to quote, he said, programs of this size should plan in windows, not singular dates. I think I personally believe that there's a lot that I would agree with there. Probably most significantly, I think about that idea of transparency and getting this one team approach, because it's very easily to feel comfortable that there's a date, but everyone knows that's not the fucking date.
And if it is, it's luck.
Yeah. Or manufactured.
Yeah.
Right. When you're talking about a date, every time that date moves, it kind of forces a conversation about why did the date move, which then forces a conversation about whose fault is it that the date moved. But the date isn't the date. This is probably like 5 years away, 6 years, or it's probably, I don't know what the end date is now. We yet to find out, 100 days to find out or something.
Yeah.
But I think this idea of like windows and almost probabilistic windows is more helpful than we've been there, right? You do the monthly schedule review where the project director is like, why is that moved by 1 day? You know, it's in 2 years' time.
Yeah, that could be 1 second added to every task. Like it can move through almost nothing. And also the concept of a window is nice because you would expect the window to shrink as time moves on. So you're getting more and more likely of what that date would look like. And as you said, you can drive some bad behaviors by saying that's the date.
Yeah.
Whether it's reporting or people's bonuses or whatever's tied to those dates, a window makes a lot of sense. And it's not like it's not the Olympics. There is a hard end. If there's a window of a year, 10 years out,
Yeah.
probably sits better than we've lost a month.
Yeah. And like the date, not only does it drive this like accusatory, this accusatory culture of like, why did the date move? Whose fault is the date move? It also then the consequence of that is, if I'm showing the date moving by a day or a month, should I just make that go away?
Yeah.
Right. And so suddenly you get people like, the classic, I can make any business look good in a spreadsheet by just tinkering with with the numbers here and there. Yeah. I think that's what happens. And it's this like comfort in precision. Oh, wow, the date didn't move. That's great.
Yeah. And there's probably 500 planners on that job. Imagine they all sneak in a day or two.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
already 3 years out.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to be learned from what Mark's approach to kind of resetting. I think we should keep a really close eye on it and maybe circle back in the next update.
Yeah.
Jumping on from one mega project to another, we had the conversation about Paris Metro. We talked about Line 15, which was the most recent extension to Paris Metro that is kind of just starting off or in the ground at the moment. One of the key takeaways and one of the things that we dug into on in that prior episode was a review that was done by the government rail authority in France that uncovered that in prior sections of Paris Metro, and I will find the quote. Yeah, so the findings from the rail authority said that the southern sections were divided into small lots involving, I think, 6 or so kilometer length tunnels and ancillary structures packages. So they had like line-wide contracts that were broken into smaller pieces, which led to coordination gaps. So multiple contractors managing adjacent sections of the kind of the same scope, and then a whole bunch of system integration risks, with interestingly calls back to the Crossrail problem, basically.
Yeah.
And so we had opened up this thought process or conversation around does size matter? I'll try and get that one in again. Big packages in mega projects, is fewer big packages better than lots of small ones? Carla, you like a small number of big packages or a big number of small packages?
Both seem threatening. So
you say both seem friendly.
Threatening.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because there's a load of pros and cons for each. So if we think to Crossrail, relatively big packages, you had stations and a tunnel, but they still had the super complex systems integrations issues, as you would expect. Tideway, that's a really clean project because they're siloed sites. And the only thing connecting them is a tunnel, which is for water. There's not systems.
Yeah.
So that worked out really well.
It's a dumb tunnel.
Yeah.
Poo tunnel. Poo tunnel's easier than train tunnels.
Yeah. So you can see why, if you're thinking as a client, you've got one pressure, which is how much you're spending. And it's tempting to go for big contracts because the administration of those contracts is small. They'll think they're passing on all the risk to the contractors, or most of the risk. It's not going to sit with them, albeit depending on the form of contract, that might go back to them in at least a shared sort of mechanism. But then you lose competitiveness because the pool of contractors is small.
Yep.
You can go for multi-billion-pound contracts.
Yep.
You're going to be paying fee on fee because they're still going to use the specialists.
Yep.
Because they don't self-deliver. Or most of them don't largely self-deliver. So it feels like a de-risked situation. Your overheads are smaller.
Your overheads for the client side are smaller. Yeah.
Administering these contracts is heavy. So there's that one side, which is go big, stay sort of lean, and try and push the risk onto the contractor.
Yeah.
And have a contract that means that you're not going to see too much of the cost come back. And then you've got a model which you could say, right, let's go with like systems rather than sections. Yep. So we can hire the specialists, which will ultimately mean lots of smaller contracts, which means super admin heavy, massive client team. Not only is it like an administrative task, you still want specialists because you're man marking people that really know what they're doing.
Yep.
So you need to really higher up or hire in serious teams to take control of that. You're not getting fee on fee. So you're kind of shifting.
And just to translate for people playing along at home, fee on fee meaning because you've got this tier one that might hire a tier two that you might have directly hired yourself. You're going to get the tier two making their profit margin and the tier one making their margin on top of the tier two's margin, which is kind of like fee on fee.
Yeah, exactly. So each side is like concentration of accountability, concentration of risk, how you want to balance it and what feels right. Big swings, ultimately client driven on what is their appetite for risk and how much ownership do they want. There's kind of the hands-on and hands-off.
And there's so many ways you can take this, right? So you can say, what's the appetite for risk? I think there's a strong argument which says at the end of the day, if the goal is to open a rail line and get revenue from a rail line, the risk that you're actually taking as the client is only a small amount of that is recoverable through your penalties for your contractors. If the bigger packages doesn't actually remove the interface risk, even though you don't hold that, like you technically contract some of that risk, you're not protected for all that risk through the penalty on the contractor. So you can kind of put some of that risk conversation over here and put it separately, because if you can accept that your risk exposure is much larger than what you recover in your contract from the contractor, you ultimately need to go, what's just going to get the project delivered quicker? So then if you bound that conversation, there's these different approaches where I think a lot of it comes down to how do you want to tackle design development? Because actually the big de-risking is how progressed is design.
Yeah, and then even, let's say you swing towards the big contract version. Yeah. It's really hard to do early contractor involvement with specialists because each of those will go with their own. Yeah. And then you're to the detriment of the works information rather than a specialist making a call on a system. You're going to have different specialists all trying to do their own thing with the little bit of information that we actually give them at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, you end up down a path of going very, very big, which is like give one person all of the stations, for example, as opposed to Crossrail where there were different people that had each station. You would have been better. You take that idea further. You go, one person has all the stations, which is interestingly like what City Metro is doing. There's in the next package that's upcoming, it's one contract for all of the stations. Melbourne Metro or Suburban Rail Loop, they're doing 3 stations and 3 stations, I think.
And you get the buying gains of
you get the buying gain,
platforms. Like, yeah.
And then you take Crossrail as an example. You have every contract having the same conversation about what's the spec on this door, and then the spec on the door gets clarified for one contract, and then you have to go and tell 10 other contractors who then go, oh, I wasn't planning to do that. Here's a compensation event.
Well, I mean, obviously, you can have like a strong PMO team, like a consultancy, like a Mace could come in and be that sort of intermediate who's trying to do a lot of the tying everything together job.
Yeah.
But then they're not really going to see much pain if it doesn't go well because...
Yeah, that's like, again, Crossrail is a really good example of this, like the Bechtel role in there.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a world where you get pushed, you can make an intellectual argument which pushes you to very, very big packages where you're going to lose on, you're basically knowing you're paying on overs because you're going to have only so many people that compete for it. You're going to pay fee on fee probably.
Yep.
But all of the interface risk is, if you package them right, all the stations or all the system wide or something, then that you minimize your interface risk. There's another world which is like, well, maybe we don't need to start digging a hole tomorrow and we can actually develop the design further ourselves. And now we can go down a path of maybe we buy all of the doors. Maybe we buy all of the escalators.
Sounds like modern methods of construction.
Maybe we buy all of the standardized components and we let much more, there might be some still designed to do, but you're novating a lot of the stuff down. I think there's an argument that that's going to be cheaper and probably quicker in the long run. But yeah, you end up doing a lot of that work yourself.
But then you've got to balance the expectation from supply chain. So it's like if you hire a plumber to do your bathroom and then you free issue the materials to them, they get pretty pissed off because suddenly their fee is quite small.
They'll still do it.
Yeah,
they'll still do it. When you're talking, Paris Metro or HS2, they'll do whatever scope. Yeah.
Do you think there's an issue though with let's say the smaller contracts model that the client organization are very aware that they're probably going to be the ones that are blamed because they're more accountable?
It depends. I think the whole thing depends on where you slice these smaller contracts. I think if you think about how you would break up a project or how contracts get interfaced, there's like physical interfaces. So tunnel meets station box, for example. Then you have kind of like technical interfaces where like my fan in my station integrates with your system, your like air system. Yeah, exactly. Then you've got kind of like organizational interfaces, which is where we let two sections of the tunnel to two different people. I think you would probably want to avoid them in that reverse order. Like I can't see a lot of case for similar objects on the same project being different contractors if you go down that the approach of like putting a lot of the design risk on them.
The hard thing with like if you think about Crossrail and tunnel vent, because they were all happening at the same time, there's probably few contractors that could actually, because it's like a huge spike of like the biggest projects and all of your work happening in a small window.
But if you do the design earlier yourself before in the contracts and you pre-buy all those components and then you've got a delivery schedule and then you're putting that into the, like vents is a perfect example. I had exactly this on Crossrail where we were developing the design at the same time as like 7 other stations were developing the design. We were all asking the same questions to different parts of the client team. One would get an answer, and then over the next month, that answer would kind of ricochet across the rest of the stations.
You didn't have a Reddit feed to share?
No, there's no Reddit. Yeah, we didn't even have Microsoft Teams then. So, but yeah, it was like the biggest China. And then we'd hear, okay, this team's got the go ahead to start buying something, and then it was like a mad rush to buy all the same thing. Yeah. I think where you have similar components, where there's like physical, whether you got technical interfaces, there's a strong argument for like either develop that design further or put that in one package.
Yep.
I don't think we resolved it. I think there's pros and cons. That's the answer.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see. Maybe there's a case study of the before and after for Paris Metro.
Back to the just to finish like if you've got large volumes of items,
yep.
I think there's a massive case for the client organization to purchase and free issue.
Certainly.
Whether they even design to assume that standardization goes back to design.
Actually,
again.
there's like there's this concept of theory of constraints, right? Probably the best thing you can do on a contractor design development is to say, there's not 15 escalators that you can choose from. This is the escalator. Yeah. Just make this one fit.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the problem
you can redesign concrete easier than a lift shaft.
Yeah, I think like when you leave so many options open, that's when the design development just takes forever.
Yeah, but designers make loads of fee on design work. So
correct. Yeah. So I think there's a really strong argument for, even if it's not the best escalator, choose one.
Yeah.
Say that's the escalator and fit it into there and buy it and have agreed dates, because the design, the options for the opportunities for the design to just take forever as we optioneer 50,000 different escalators is just going to be removed. I do it for everything. All right, we got to an answer. Right, final topic. We might keep this one.
Can we just sell the construction industry?
From the armchair in the podcast.
Driver.
Yeah. Okay, so the last bit of news is Australia.
Large village built.
No, it's a city. It's a big city. Australia is planning to build its first new city in, I thought I had the date. It was like 110 years, 150. What is it? 150 years? Australia is planning to build its first new city in approximately 150 years, with recent approvals for Bradfield City Center, which is a 114-hectare development strategically positioned adjacent to one of the under construction Western Sydney International Airport Sydney Metro rail stations. Let me say that again in way clearer terms. There is a new airport being built in Western Sydney. There is a rail line built from Sydney to that new airport, and along that route there are some stations, and there is a station that is in, some would say, in the middle of nowhere, and there is now been approved for a 114-hectare new city, which, when development, has plans to generate 20,000 direct jobs, to create 10,000 new homes, and has already got apparently committed $1 billion from the New South Wales state government. First question, Carlos, is this a city? Second question Is this news or is this marketing fluff?
This is marketing fluff.
Job done. I think we can wrap there.
For anyone who's from the village of Bradfield near Reading, it's about the same size as the village you live in. 100-hectare site with 10,000 homes. It's a bit punchy to call it a city, but yeah.
Yeah, if you took that to like Saudi Arabia, they would call that a hotel.
Yeah, it's a bit like Vauxhall in London, which is one tube stop and 10,000 flats. Yeah. The thing that actually surprised me more was the 150 years. Everyone always thinks of Australian cities as being relatively new.
Yeah.
So if you told me that most of the cities were less than 150 years old, I'd probably believe you.
Yep.
But I was quite surprised to see that.
I think there's a story here that I think that I'd like to tell, which is kind of like the economic development creates this new city, blah 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 blah. I think what I read when I saw this thing was it just felt a lot like there's these big visions of new cities, and these examples of them a bunch in Saudi Arabia with say Neom at the moment, where people have got this big vision. They want to try and drive people's behavior to go move there or invest there or whatever it might be. And so it requires some over-indexed marketing hubris and pizzazz to kind of get it into the news, get people talking about it, and ultimately, I think, drive interest and investment. I definitely read that. That's not with any inside knowledge.
That said, on the new city front, looking into the longer list of new cities being built at the moment, there's some pretty wild ones. But there's one called Madinat Al Harir in Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
Give that a Google. It's massive.
I'll get the spelling after this.
It's a full-on city, Dubai style, everything brand new, over the top in terms of scale, $600 billion.
But having said that, I'm the biggest fan in the world of like transport orientated developments. I think the idea of like
it makes tons of sense.
Using like rail development to spur growth, and take an example back to London of HS2 and Crossrail and the Park Royal or the Common development. I think it was like 25,000 apartments or something, which is like 2.5 times this city. So we should call that the city of Park Royal and all that.
And why build a city somewhere and then try and go for funding to build the infrastructure around it?
And just sit in cars with traffic, which is what for those that don't know, Western Sydney is like traffic central. It can sometimes take hours to get into the city centre. So having a development sat basically on top of a rail connector, I'm a biggest fan in the world there. But it's a couple of towers.
It was Australia's Croydon. You labelled it as the other day.
I didn't. I think you said that. And no one in Australia will know if that's insulting or not.
I'm a South London guy. That's not.
Isn't Croydon South London?
Yeah.
I see. Okay, so you said it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm allowed to say it because I'm from South London.
I think it's more insulting to Australia.
Luckily it's a new city, so no one's from there yet.
Yeah. The two farmers who currently have the 3 blocks of land that currently.
On that note, I think we've run out of time. Olu looks stressed. So thank you very much for tuning into today's show. If you did enjoy today's episode, please do think about liking this video or following us on your chosen podcast platform. We really appreciate your support and we'll catch you next week.
Off for a drinky poo. Bye-bye.